Hello. In this chapter, I want to look at why we do the human experience of work in this way, and we'll talk about the business case. In his article in 1998 in Harvard Business Review and the Experience Economy book, which was written by Joe Pine and a co-author, he talks about the progression of value within the experience economy. Many of you have probably become aware as consumers, as customers, that a lot of whether we go to a restaurant or a hotel or travel or even a floral shop or where we buy clothing, that a lot of companies are really focused on the customer experience. So really what's at the base of that? The base is when we take a commodity, a very basic element of something, and we customize it, then it becomes something higher. So a commodity, if we customize it, becomes a good. A good is something we make. If we customize a good, we end up with a service, something we deliver. If we customize a service, we ended up with an experience. And the experience is something we stage with props and people and processes, etc., in a system, which I'll explain a little bit later. If we customize experiences, we end up with something that is truly transformational for the customers as well as for the organization. Think of it in terms of a simple cup of coffee. If you were to take coffee beans, the commodity part of a cup of coffee, you would pay maybe 30 cents for that commodity, for that cup. If you went to a cafe and had a good cup of coffee, you might pay $1.50 or €1.50. Now, these are pre-inflation prices, but look at how much the value has jumped already from a commodity to a good. And then once you go to a service, when that's delivered with a nice something that's customizing that good cup of coffee, then you can even double that value. If, however, we customize that service and create an experience in a nice coffee shop with leather couches, maybe live music, free Wi-Fi, and good friends, then that experience is worth far more. So imagine if we took that same principle and applied it to work. Where are we on this spectrum in the types of things that we deliver within our workspace? This is a slide looking at data from McKinsey and Forrester in the last, from reports in the last 5 years. And you can look at across the spectrum about revenue growth, return on spend, brand awareness, customer and employee retention and satisfaction. Companies that focus on experiences really outperform the competition. And if we look at employee experience-centric companies, they also outperform their competitors on some very significant revenue and growth figures. So, what's the business case for employee experience? As I hope to show with you in this series, we get better data insights, and we can be more sure that we're solving the right problems before we get into solutioning. Another thing that all this research approach helps us to do is to prioritize and make sure that we put our resources in the right places. The way of working is also more effective. It's more cross-functional. It's more working like product teams. So the way of working within the organization becomes far more effective. All of this leads to business impact and competitive advantage, as I hope to demonstrate further in this series. And one of the key outcomes is also that our colleagues are happier. Where did the human experience of work come from? Everything has a great origin story. So the origin story of human-centered design is this. If you go back 60, 70 years to the 1950s, 1960s, computers are really just the realm of big businesses. And a computer with the power of something that we can hold in our hand today, say in an iPhone, took up an entire room. And the people operating that computer needed to be dedicated and trained programmers to be able to create punch cards and programs for those computing systems. That all changed with the advent of personal computers. Well, the story of how we got personal computers is really the story, the origin story of human-centered design. If you go back to the year 1984, when the first Macintosh was introduced, there was a great advertisement or commercial, as we say, that talked about how This would free us up from this type of use of computers to something that could be personalized and brought into homes and apartments where every person could become a publisher, become their own business. And with the advent of the internet, this went global. So the first Macintosh was really billed as the computer for the rest of us. And this team at Macintosh would they were composed of people that would go out and develop research on people who were not computer techies, who were not proficient at computers. And they would try to study the problems they were trying to solve and define those and say, could this be done with a personal computer? That's really how human-centered design came into being. So one of these people was Lawrence Tesler. Lawrence Tesler passed away just a couple of years ago, and there was a great story about his life, about how he and his colleagues at Apple would talk to the front receptionist and say, "Tell us how you type a paper. What is it you're typing that paper for? What is the outcome? What is the goal that you're trying to achieve? How do you make multiple copies of that? How do you make corrections? How do you make etc." So that's how we got. Lawrence Tesler is the person who invented copy paste. He and his team were the ones who invented the first Mac user interface that looked like a typefaced printed paper with white background and really nice fonts. So it was really the design graphics and everything that went into this came as a result of the type of research that they did. They would bring in the UPS driver, set him down in front of a mouse and look to see if it was intuitive for that person. Could they understand how that mouse worked? And they did this with multiple people. So any new product that they prototype, they did a lot of testing and research to see, could the average person who didn't have that computer degree understand what was going on? So if there are really four main roots that I've been able to discern that feed into human-centered design today. The first is design itself. So with this Mac team, the computer for the rest of us in 1984, soon on the heels of that, coming out of that, we had what was called human-centered design. Don Norman was the first head of user experience at Apple back in the 80s and 90s. He talked to me last year about how he and his team would go out to stores and watch how people loaded their boxes in their trunks of their cars. And they pretty soon decided or understood that the box didn't fit the trunk, or if somebody was taking it home on their bicycle, they had a difficult challenge. So the packaging that Apple came up with came out of these user experience research that they did. Service design, as we'll see a bit later, is really taking human-centered design to another level. It's a very systemic, comprehensive way, looking at all the connecting points within an organization and how that works. Then we have design thinking, which came about in that era. The company IDEO, which also came out of this group in Silicon Valley, started applying some of these principles of human-centered design to businesses and organizations back in the 90s. And the Stanford D School was established, and a sister school was established, the Hasso-Plattner Institute in Germany. So these are the kind of one root of the human experience of work. Another one has to do with analytics. So how we understand and define data. So market segmentation has been around with us since the 50s. Psychographics and the study of attitudes and how people respond to things. Cognitive analytics, predictive analytics, people analytics more recently. And also the behavioral branch. So psychology, sociology, ethnographic research has to do with going out to where people are and studying them in their habitat, in their environment, understanding the context and how that impacts what is going on for them. And doing behavioral research, we really want to understand why people do what they do, what motivates them. The fourth branch is really around agile. So Kanban came about with Toyota in the 1940s as a way of improving production and communication in that production line. Lean, Sprint and Scrum and Agile all came about within a decade in about 20, 30 years ago. And then this all led up to what we have as the field of user experience, which I mentioned earlier, which really came into focus around the mid-90s. Customer experience about 10 years later. So the application of the same principles in all of this in a customer realm really became more prevalent around 2005. And then more recently, this third wave, as I mentioned, employee experience, or as we prefer to call it, the human experience of work. So in the next chapter, we'll talk about what do I need to know and do.